Going. All right. So, first of all, what I was asking you to acknowledge, Hythloday, probably various things, but the thing I'd like to focus on at the moment is that all the data we have is from the first person perspective. That's where all the data comes from, right? Now, you seem to admit that there is a phenomenon of feeling like a first person, the illusion of being a homunculus. I think it is an illusion. I think what we really are is neural tissue, and the neural tissue is programmed to project itself into this homunculus, the string puller. Okay. Now, Gary can't recognize that he and I are allied in this kind of point of pointing out that since it's possible for a person to, or let's just say persons plus person and a dog, to have this first person feeling, that means it exists in the universe. And it's just part of whatever physical laws generated. We would agree. You think determinism, your version of determinism is the only way to believe that there's really answers. I don't think that. I think if you can predict all the possible outcomes, and one of those happens, that counts as it being determined as part of the probability distribution. Those are different definitions. We could use different words. Don't get confused by that. And Gary doesn't see that, he and I are both trying to emphasize this, which I think you already admit. Right? You already admit that there is this first person phenomenon. You discount it as somewhat unimportant or beside the point, but that's just rhetoric. When you say, hey, you shouldn't let your feelings intervene in this stuff, the fact is, the subject matter is that there are such a thing as feelings. It's also about willpower, but my point is that I like determinism.
Hey, hush! Hush!
Ridiculous. Dogs. We all agree that this phenomena happens. That means it's possible for there to be a feeling of what it's like to have a feeling in a particular location in the universe. So the universe can have that feeling, or you could call it generate, but that almost is a little bit dualistic. Homunculus is sneaking in. The universe itself is having a feeling at this location, and a different feeling at your location. Right, so that's happening, and we're all accepting that. Now, I like that you dug into the film strip issue. I thought it's very friendly to determinism because, as you noticed, it points out that the future frames, they haven't happened yet. They're not being projected. They're not the current state of what's being projected, but they're essentially already out there. You could say they're not out there, but if it's determined what's going to be at that point, that's a lot like them being out there, right? And nothing hangs on that difference, but I'm just saying we can try to get our rhetoric as well, the rhetoric we can agree on, that we could agree on it. So yeah, and I've mentioned this before actually about the film strip, that the film strip is just what you remember. And I haven't mentioned that the film strip, as a memory, is subject to fading memory. So the film strip as we know it is changing. Because in principle, there is a film strip. And the fact that you're changing is just kind of like, well, your hard drive alters things over time. It degrades like all things, is subject to entropy. But you're right to point this out. A better model that's behind the film strip. I think the film strip is a good metaphor. It's easier, it's simpler, and it gets all the same facets. But it is true, you could just say we're a little creature. But you drew the input boxes on the outside, and you don't know that there is an outside. By the time you get the information, it's on the inside. So maybe the other end of the arrow that's pointing at you is on the inside. It seems like it's from an outside. You and I agree. I think that's a very solid theory. I live by the theory. I treat it as if it's a fact that it's coming from the outside, from an outside, or at least a shared space, right? A shared set of information that is material to all creatures that exist within it. But we would be a box that's getting information, and then some of the information is swirling around and coming back down and being a new arrow to us, but really it's swirled around and come back in on us. And so the film strip is all the data that you remember, but you've been processing it, so it's also all the process memory that you remember. I don't see how that changes any of my arguments, but I agree that that's a more technically accurate. It's not necessarily more apt, because the film strip can also just be thought as that memory up to the present. The present's over here, I guess. Up to the present and going back what we currently, our current state of what's swirling around that we can still regenerate a memory about. Doesn't change my arguments at all, because what I'm asking you to acknowledge is that all of our information comes through this. If you discount it and say that you can't trust any information from it, don't take information from the first person's perspective, pay no attention, then there is no data. Right? In that case, there's no data. Now, when you say magic, it is a slur or whatever, right? Because I'm not doing what you said is that third column of magic. I believe there is a pattern. I believe it is material. I'm simply saying that it could have aspects that you keep saying balls and dice and all these, but I kept asking you plumbing and things that work weirder ways. Waves in the ocean, these are mechanisms too, right? So all physics. And I'm saying not all physics includes a deterministic imperative. For example, quantum mechanics, which is what describes all chemistry. Now, you think you have a way around that. Fine, I accept that you have a theory about a way around that, but that doesn't mean you get to go like, well, the consensus is, yeah, a lot of people in the philosophical, scientific discussion of philosophy still think that, but not actual scientists. It's part of quantum mechanics that everybody, Einstein lost the does God play dice? Or Einstein technically was correct. God doesn't play dice because there is no God. Now, as in magic, you talked about infinity. This is interesting to me because I was going to make a video about finity versus infinity, right? So, which is harder to believe? Like, you seem to be saying infinity is harder to believe. But I think finiteness is hard to believe. It's harder to believe that the universe, for example, is finite. There's nothing outside it. Outside isn't even a question. There's nothing not there either. Because it just stops. How could it stop? How could something be finite? Seems like they're always, when you're talking about something big, the universe, yeah, there's a finite number of finite number of digital pens on my desk. Yes, but when we're talking about the universe and things like that, well, how could it be finite? On the other hand, I understand how could there always be more? That's like violates the conservation of energy or something. Just there's forever everything. The system is fundamentally open, but maybe the system is fundamentally open. There's nothing I know that proves it has to be open or closed. Now, the solution we have right now is actually more acceptable than either solution on its own. We have a bounded, not finite, but a bounded universe. It's a certain number of light years across, but it's relativistic, so that bubble of acrossness is centered always on every location, every person, and it's not finite because space is infinite. It's just like a logarithmic compression or whatever. It's just at the end, it's like the edge of a black hole. So an infinite amount of space is packed up into there. That's weird too. I didn't say it was great. I just said it's better than the idea of just a purely infinite things go on forever. It's unbounded, right? Infinite energy in it. This way, there's a finite amount of energy, even though there's an infinite amount of space. I mean, it's trying. It occurs to me this is the kind of thing where Gary goes, well, just make up your mind. No, this is not about having to make up my mind prematurely on things, right? There are open questions. What isn't open is that we have a data set. This represents the data set. So that input box, and it's got data that is stored, but it's not really stored because it has to regenerate it. It's sort of a living storage, right? Something that keeps being reprojected, and as a result, it also changes a little bit. But it's too bad. That's what we've got. That data in there, whatever data is in there, the signal and the noise from the reduction and everything, noise from the original input, that's what the film strip relates to, right? And that's the only information that you have, right? The idea of finity is that, well, you're mortal, you have a finite amount of information. But there's an infinite number of points potentially mathematically. You said you like it to be mathematical in there. Let's just call that finite. And the infinite is that we think the world goes on after we die. And I think there's other candidates for what counts as determinism besides what you're talking about, one state to one state to one state. I think that it's hypothetical, the idea of combining all states into one state. And I think that it's pretty clear you understand the quantum mechanical idea that a multiple state leads to a multiple state. And the weird thing in that, in quantum mechanics, the thing that isn't given any room, is the fact that it's ever just the single state that we see. According to the quantum mechanics, it's all explained, no problem, by there's a higher dimensional space. All this stuff is going on. The problem is that we are evidence of how things can be in the universe. We're phenomena of the universe. I am what the universe is feeling in my location. Why is it feeling that? Because it can generate the feelings. But it can't, not with the mechanics. Well, you need to invent a mechanics where it can, because we see that. And when you want to say feelings don't count in physics, no. When the subject is feelings as a phenomena, as a physical phenomena, right? And if it's happening as a phenomena, something's going on. The sun is rising. Oh, that's the wrong words, but something's still going on. Animals can have this stream of consciousness of what it feels like to be there at their location, to feel like what it likes to feel something. And since that can happen, the universe can do that. And the reason it needs to be explained is because that's the subject we're discussing, will. This phenomena, we're trying to explain it, and you're trying to explain it by it doesn't exist. You don't seem to get that you have a system where you went through the list. No first person. Well, the universe is generating this phenomena we know as feeling the first person thing. Call it purple persons. The purple phenomena. We know the universe is creating the purple phenomena. And you can't say, well, I have a system where there's no room for purple phenomena. Boom, explained. No. And you could say, well, I don't have to explain it. But you're talking about that exact phenomena, and your answer is it can't exist. You see the problem there, why I don't accept you're more humble than me, but more logical than me, because you figured out an explanation that says, oh, the phenomena that we all admit is happening doesn't exist. That's not killing the homunculus. Your system kills the homunculus. And by the way, I don't believe in the homunculus, right? I don't think we need a driver in the car. The car is self-driving. We are the thing having willpower. Nobody's pulling strings to make the willpower. It's a physical law that this chemistry is able to pull off. That's my idea. But you're talking about killing the homunculus is killing off the thing that I also think is not a homunculus, because you're talking about no observer, no first person. Kills off first person. But the phenomena of first person does happen. And you can't say, well, you're not allowed to say so because that's just a feeling. Yeah, the feeling, that's what we're talking about. The feeling exists, right? The feeling of being an ego, of the phenomena that we call the purple state or first person experience. It's about all we know exists. Everything else could be simulated by a computer. But we know that phenomena of having a feeling of first personhood does exist. We all experience it all the time. Now, how many things are there like that? Not many, but that's one of them. So you're not doing a good job killing the homunculus if it's still there. Like you're saying, the homunculus, I say there's a way to get rid of the homunculus without throwing out first person perspective with the bathwater, but you're insistent it includes that first person perspective. You've killed the first person perspective with your determinism model, but the problem is the phenomena still exists, which means that there's a problem with your determinism model. Reduction to absurdity is assuming the thing is true, and then you get to a contradiction, like an existent phenomena doesn't exist. That kind of contradiction follows from assuming your version of determinism. Doesn't follow from a kind of determinism that allows for stochastic functionality, and we know that there's mathematical ways to do that. We know that it could be the Einsteinian version of no dice through Wolfram, because we've seen very simple rules lead to randomness and indeterminism. And it could be the interaction of that. And you might say, well, then that automatically means the next random number is going to be taken. And we don't know that yet. Okay. So I maintain that my picture of things is homunculus free. Right? That little box where the arrows are not on the outside as far as you know, but there's arrows, but they're on the inside, and then they swirl around, and we have a picture of what our history has been and what our current experience is. That box is the thing having that feeling. There's not a separate homunculus having the box's feeling. That's just an ancient folk addiction to the idea of dualism. We assign those ideas to two different kinds of things. One's material and one's immaterial. And you've decided there's only the material world, so I'm going to throw away all the things we used to categorize as immaterial. And I've said everything categorized as immaterial really was material. It wasn't as it seems. It could even be a lie. But for example, the unicorn, it's immaterial. No, it's a data structure in a human mind. It's all the pictures that have been projected out of human minds through hands to paint a picture of a unicorn. So you can't just throw out everything that was falsely. Nothing's immaterial. There's things that are more or less in the sense of more important and less important. There are things that are imaginary, but imaginary things are material, and illusions are phenomena. calling them illusion means we know they aren't as they seem, but there's still evidence that something's happening. So I think if you kill a phenomena that's still happening, that maybe you didn't, that it should be killed. It means if you're right, it would not exist, but it does exist. We experience it. And you are trying to say, I don't, my experiences are good for nothing. If your experiences are good for nothing, none of the information that you've figured out from your experiences is good for anything. And I don't think you think that. You act like you don't think that.